We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Tesam Beis Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 19b. On the previous Amud, Rav said anytime it says the word chok, it indicates a requirement. The Gemara asked on that from another statement of Rav. Rav said by Karba Mincha, even though chok is written by Karba Mincha, but Rav said by Karba Mincha only that which is repeated is required. Otherwise, there is no requirement. And so the question is, why isn't there an automatic requirement because of the word chok? And the Gemara answered on the previous Amud that by Karba Mincha in particular, it says Migirso Mishamna, could have just said Geras and Shemen. From the fact that it says Migirso Mishamna, it indicates that by Karba Mincha specifically, it's only where something is repeated that we say there is a requirement. And the Mesaras Hashas takes out the words over here, Geras v'Shemen me'akvin ve'in davar acher ma'akev. That's coming up in a moment. It was put in at this point in the Gemara by mistake. And so the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above. Amar Rav says, Kol mokom she'echzer lach hakasa b'Torah mincha eino ela la'akev. Again, when it comes to mincha, anytime the Torah repeats something, so that's a requirement. U'Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Geras v'Shemen ma'akvin, only Geras and Shemen are required. Ve'in davar acher ma'akev, there's nothing else that is required. And Rashi explains, Geras v'Shemen hu dehechzer ben hakasa v'mi'akva, meaning only by Geras v'Shemen where there's a repetition do we say it's required. V'ein davar acher ma'akev, and there's nothing else that's required. V'yaf al pi she'echzer bo hakasav, even if it's something that the pasuk repeated, still there's no requirement according to Shmuel. It's only by Geras and Shemen. And again, with regards to Geras and Shemen, as we said on the previous Amud, the particular requirement is that they cannot be chaser, they cannot be missing anything. And the Gemara continues and asks, V'le Shmuel, but according to Shmuel, afal gav detana beikra, even though the pasuk repeats it, lo ma'akvale, it's not going to be a requirement. And Rashi explains, V'afal gav detana beikra bitmia, this is a question, is it possible to say that if it's repeated by the pasuk, it is not required? And so instead the Gemara says, Ella rather, kol heicha detana beikra v'adai mi'akva, anytime the pasuk repeats it, it certainly is ma'akev, even Shmuel will agree to that. V'hacha b'melo kumso bekumso kamiflagi, here they're arguing about melo kumso and bekumso. And Rashi explains, Melo kumso ksiv b'chaducht, it says in one place, Melo kumso, talking about the komets, the fistful by the Karba Mincha, and Hadar shani b'dibure, and then the pasuk changes its language, uchsiv b'kumso, it says b'kumso, l'midrash minei b'yado yikmotz, and the drasha is that he has to take the fistful with his hand, lo yasa kli l'midas kumso, it is not okay to make a vessel that has the same measure as his fist, rather he has to take it specifically with his fist. As the Gemara now continues, the Tanya, as we learned in a Braisa, Melo kumso bekumso, it says Melo kumso, it says bekumso, shalo yasa midala komets, he shouldn't make a measure for the komets. And so Rav holds Hanami Tana Beikra, in this issue also there's a repetition in the pasuk. T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, Vayakre v'samincha v'yamale kapo mimena, it talks about the fact, again, yamale kapo, it talks about filling his hand, you see that the hand has to be used. However, Shmuel responds, that's not considered to be a repetition, and therefore this particular issue is not a requirement, because as Shmuel says, Doros Misha lo yalfin, on this pasuk, when it says Vayakre v'samincha v'yamale kapo mimena, that was Kod Sheisha, that was a carbon gist at that time. You can't learn something for all generations from something that is just Kod Sheisha. But the Gemara continues, V'lo yalef Shmuel Doros Misha, is it really true that Shmuel does not learn Doros Misha, something for all generations? He doesn't learn from something that's just at a particular time. But we learned in a Mishnah, Klei halach mekachin es halach, vessels that hold liquids, they sanctify liquids. Umidas yavesh mekachin es hayavesh, and measures that hold dry measures, they sanctify dry measures. Vein klei halach mekachin es hayavesh, vessels for liquids are not mekadesh, they don't sanctify dry. Velo midas yavesh mekachin es halach, and measures for dry, they don't sanctify liquids. V'yomar Shmuel, and Shmuel said on that, Lo shanu elamidos, that's only true when it comes to measures. Avol mizrakos, but when it comes to the basins, the bowls, mekachin, they actually do sanctify, even though they're made for liquids, but still they are able to be mekadesh, even yavesh, they're even able to be mekadesh that which is dry. Techsiv, as it's written, Shneyem Melayim Solas, it says Shneyem Melayim Solas, they're filled with flour, and so therefore you see, it can be mekadesh dry. And the issue is that this pasuk as well is talking about Kod Sheisha, it's talking about the karbonos of the Nesiim that were just at that time. And the Gemara continues and says to that, Shani Hasam, it's different over there, the Tana Bakra, Trace Ar Zimnin, there, that phrase is repeated in the pasuk 12 times, because there were 12 gifts of the Nesiim, and so therefore if it's repeated so many times, then we are able to learn out from there. And Rashi explains, kapo, his palm or his hand, velo kli, and not a vessel, hilkachim kamatz bekli pasul. Therefore, if he were to take the fistful with a vessel that's used for measuring it, that would be pasul, would be disqualified. And then the Gemara said, doros mishalo yalfinan, we can't learn something for all generations from something that's only at that time. That pasuk was talking about the miluim, and again, that was only at that time. Hachi koamar, chazara de geres v'shemen hu da'asoi likuva. When the pasuk repeats by geres and shemen, so then already we can say that that's required. V'chein dugmas, and anything similar to that. Shehuchzeru b'Torah minchas doros, as long as it was repeated by a mincha for all generations. Aval v'yimale kapo, but the pasuk of v'yimale kapo, lo chazari, again, since that's just l'shah, so therefore that's not considered to be a repetition that counts in this regard. And then the Gemara said, lo shanu dein makdish yovesh ela b'midas lach, kagon hin v'lug dechol mida lo chazile. When it comes to a measure, a midas lach, like a hin and a log, so then we say it's not mekadesh dry. Ela lemilse lemidos, only for the thing it's made to measure. V'hin v'log b'midas yovesh leka. There's no such thing as a hin and a lug when it comes to dry measures. Aval mizrakos, but when it comes to the bowls, shehin klei dam, which are vessels made for the blood, mekadshin solas yovesh, they can be mekadesh solas flour which is dry. V'yolif taimam in Nisiyim, and it's learned from the Nisiyim. Alma gomar doros misha. You see that we can learn doros misha. The Nisiyim were just l'shah, they were just at that time, and we are able to learn something for all generations from there. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Rav Kahana v'Rav Asi l'Rav. Rav Kahana and Rav Asi, they said to Rav, V'harei hagosha. But what about bringing close to the Mizbeach, the Tana Bakra, that is repeated in the Pasuk, V'lo mi'akva, and that's something that's not required. And the Gemara continues and asks, "My Tanabe, where's that repeated? D'chsiv, because it's written, Zos Toras hamincha hakri vosa b'nei Aaron lifnei Hashem. It says this is the law of the mincha. Bring it. The b'nei Aaron should bring it lifnei Hashem. And so that's a repetition of Hagasha, bringing it close to the Mizbeach. But the Gemara says that repetition doesn't count. Tahu l'gvoa lamakom hu da'asa. That pasuk is just to establish exactly where you should bring it. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, lifnei Hashem, it says lifnei Hashem. Yachal b'mayriv, one might think at the west side of the Mizbeach. Talmud lomer Pnei HaMizbeach, the pasuk says El Pnei HaMizbeach, by the face of the Mizbeach. El Pnei HaMizbeach. Now, if it just said El Pnei HaMizbeach, Yachol B'Darim, one would think the south side of the Mizbeach. Talmud Lomer Lefnei Hashem, it says before Hashem. Haketzad, how so? Magisha B'Keren Dromis Ma'aravis Keneged Chuda Shel Keren V'Dayo. He brings it close to the southwestern corner of the Mizbeach, and that is sufficient. And the Gemara continues, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Rabbi Eliezer says, Yachol Yagishena L'Ma'arava Shel Keren, L'Deroma Shel Keren. One might think he brings it close to the west of the corner, to the south of the corner. Amrit, we say as follows, Kol Mokom Shato Motzi Shtei Mikros. Anytime you have two psukim, Echad Mekayim Atzmo, Mekayim Chavero, in one pasuk you can fulfill both. V'Echad, and in one way, Mekayim Atzmo, Mevatalas Chavero. If you take one method or one pasuk, you'll be able to fulfill that pasuk, but you'll nullify the other pasuk. So then, Manichen es we leave aside that one which fulfills itself but nullifies its friend. And instead, we grab hold, so to speak, of the one that fulfills itself and fulfills its friend. If you're going to say Lefnei Hashem in the west, then you're going to nullify Pnei HaMizbeach, which would be the south. But if you say Al Pnei HaMizbeach in the south, then you still have fulfilled that it is Lifnei Hashem. And the Gemara says, V'hecha kayamta, now how have you fulfilled Lifnei Hashem in the south? Amar Rav Ashi says, Kasavar Haitana, it's because this Tana holds, Kulei Mizbeach B'tzafon Koi, the entire Mizbeach is actually in the north, and so the south of the Mizbeach is Lifnei Hashem. And Rashi explains, Man Tonaba, or again, some have the gears of My Tonaba. Kilomer means to say, Eza Mikra Shonaba, Hakre Vosa B'nei Aaron Lefnei Hashem. Where's the pasuk that repeats it? When it says, Hakre Vosa B'nei Aaron Lefnei Hashem. And the Gemara says, Yochel B'mayrav, one might think the west, B'kir Ma'aravi Shal Mizbeach, means the western wall of the Mizbeach, of the altar. Hainu Lefnei Hashem, that could be considered Lefnei Hashem, because that's Keneged Pesach or Hechel, to Hechel B'mayrav. That corresponds to the entry into the Hechel of the Beis HaMikdash, because that's in the west. Talmud Lomer al Pnei HaMizbeach. It says Pnei HaMizbeach, the face of the Mizbeach. Pnei HaMizbeach Zed Darim. The Pnei HaMizbeach is the south. Shahakevesh B'Darim, because the ramp, that's in the south. And then the Gemara said, Keneged chudo shel karen beperak beis de sota parach mai dayo. The Gemara asks in Sota, what does it mean you bring it to the corner vidayo and that's sufficient? That's discussed in Sota. Lema'aravo ledroma kan vikan, here and here, the west and the south. And the Gemara then said, Kulei mizbeach b'tzafon, the entire mizbeach is in the north. Azara koi, it's in the north of the Azara. Upesach heichel be'emtza Azara. Now the entrance to the heichel is in the middle of the Azara. V'keven d'chol mizbeach b'chatzi Azara omen. Now if the whole mizbeach is in half of the Azara, bo b'tzafon, it's in the northern part. Ishtakach tekir duromis shal mizbeach. It comes out that the southern wall of the mizbeach, kol lifnei pesach heichel, it's going to end right there at the entrance of the heichel. V'nikra duromo shal mizbeach lifnei Hashem. So the south of the Mizbeach is going to be called Lifnei Hashem. But the Gemara continues and asks, Maskif lo Rav Huna. Rav Huna asks the following question, Hare melach, what about salt? That's the salting that has to be done by the Karban Mincha. To lo tana beikra, that is not repeated in the Pasuk. Uma'akva, and it is required. Umi'akva be, it is a requirement. Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Bris melach olam, it says Bris melach olam, shetahei, that it should be, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph.